the garden, new day on the horizon. Midnight calls, the wind comes in through windows and old walls. She says time is a rerun of playing God for a season. We go down to the river, whether saint or sinner, they've all got ties to the giver. We all go down to the river, lay me down when the night falls, give our bones when the time calls. Oh my brother, my sister, we all go down to the river.
We're standing on some of the highest peaks in the Blue Mountains. Behind us, this is part of the catchment of Dalpura Creek, one of those beautiful, clean mountain streams. A lot of people come here to actually go down the canyon or to look at these beautiful sandstone pagoda formations. This is beautiful. It's conserved as national park. It's also a wilderness area, and all of this area is protected as a UNESCO Natural World Heritage Area. Dalpura Creek is an example of what waterways in the Sydney Basin and the Blue Mountains used to look like before Europeans came here. This is as clean as it looks. I've been coming here for about a decade studying this. Its waters have more H2O and less of anything else. It really is sparkling, clear, very low minerals, and the type of metals you get here, iron and manganese and aluminium, they help give sandstone the colour. But into these beautiful waters, they flow down into the national park, into the Grose River, and then it flows into the Hawkesbury Nepean. No barrier. Very rare for Australia to have these live wild rivers. But next we're going to look what happens to this creek. It gets affected from mining and nothing is ever the same again. Dalpura Creek should be one of the most pristine, clean waterways going down into a highly protected part of the Grose River and Blue Mountains National Park, World Heritage Area. But behind us, this is the residual effects of mining. The Canyon coal mine closed in 1997, nearly 25 years ago. This is drainage that still comes out today because they've cracked the strata. Drainage seeps into the old mine workings, hits the coal, the sulphur, dissolves metals, and you can actually see behind us this whole periodic table of metals: aluminium, iron, manganese. But the nasty one you can't see is nickel and zinc. And this causes a contamination plume going down Dalpura Creek into the Grose River. So this mine shut down 1997. There was not one piece, not one action in terms of repairing the damage. This is an ecological disaster. The mining industry has walked away from it, but what makes it worse is that the regulators allowed them to do so. The mine operated for over 50 years, made lots of money, shipped coal away from here, but who cleans up the damage? The answer is no one. The problem is left for the environment, one of the most sensitive and protected areas in the world, and for future generations. And this is what concerns me about the mining industry, in Australia in particular. We're happy to exploit new sources of ore, jobs and growth, but then we get left with this. So who fixes this up? And this is why we're looking at a toxic waterfall coming out. And I'm really sorry to say this, but this will probably be a toxic waterfall in a century from now.
While the pollution going into the Grose Valley and Wollongambie rivers goes unnoticed by most, Blue Mountains locals are very concerned. As a canyoner myself, I get to see firsthand the effects of pollution flowing into the Wollongambie and Grose rivers. We explore these ecosystems, abseiling, jumping and swimming through what is normally crystal clear waters. The canyons and their ecosystems symbolise nature in its purest form, and when I see coal fines, black coal fines, thick paste coating beautiful sandbars, making the water black, coating vegetation and other plant life, it really makes me sad when I think about how old this landscape is, and to see that degrade so quickly in such a short amount of time and what can happen, it's really saddening. And I think as a society we have a great obligation to not just ourselves but future generations to look after these precious areas, the wilderness for everything it represents.
Not only is water the lifeblood of our landscape, but it also is in us. So ultimately what pollutes our waterways actually makes it into our bodies. If you think about it, when our drinking water is polluted, we are consuming that, and this can't always be filtered out. We're seeing toxic heavy metals actually accumulating in our watercourses. Even if mines are located outside of the World Heritage Area, they are making it into these beautiful watercourses that are coming downstream and flowing into our water supply.
Warram everyone, my name's Chris Tobin. I'm a Darug man, and we're up here at the art camp. It's a camp that I host up in the Blue Mountains on the Darling Causeway. People come and we talk over all sorts of issues, but it is an opportunity for people to connect with Aboriginal people and connect with country, and it does that for me. This little area here was disturbed. It's why I set up here. We're pulling out oil drums. I've banked up rubbish at the entrance of the driveway here, with the idea that if the state was serious about caring for the country and looking after it, they would have cleaned that rubbish up. They're not that concerned to do that. Mind you, there is so much more damage that they should be dealing with, but they've pretty much finished their work here. The rehabilitation plan finished in 2016. So the infrastructure that's left is going to be with us, and the damage to the water is the one that probably concerns us the most. So surrounding this bit of area is all World Heritage National Park. The plan was that this bit of Crown land that was used as a coal mine since the 90s and has finished up since was going to be a part of the World Heritage System, but the government cannot get enough money, and so aside from the money they've made destroying this place, pulling coal out, they're wanting to now sell it. So it becomes very distressing when we can't discharge our ancestral obligations, and have to watch the place get destroyed.
One of the biggest problems that I've seen with environmental contamination from mining is the fact that no responsibility or onus is put back on the mine. And so when we do close and we shut up shop and we leave, there was never a responsibility to begin with.
Yeah.
So then there's no one to clean it up.
Yeah. And well, what happens when the mine closes really and the environmental protection licence is in essence cancelled? They're done, they move on, and these contaminants are still flowing out for potentially a century. So ultimately what we're seeing is everyone packs up shop and moves on, and these mines, most of them aren't actually being rehabilitated.
So with Red Bank Creek, what has happened is there's been longwall mining underneath the creek, and we've seen geological fractures happening, and those fractures are now on the surface. So all of that lovely water that we originally had has flown through those cracks. It's mixed in with the groundwater, and then that groundwater has been pushed back up to the surface, and all the metals that were in the groundwater then come up. They oxidize with the air, and so we start to see a really red rust kind of layer on top of the water, and that surface water is no longer habitable for ecological life.
Yeah.
So there's no oxygen in the water, a cocktail of metals, nothing can live there. And those cracks are so big that I'm really skeptical that we'll ever see flow back in there. And that's some of the long-term, that will become a legacy problem. That's a long-term problem that I'm really skeptical we will be able to fix.
We just need to learn to really protect places like this, not just because it's best for the environment, because it's what's best for us.
We're standing at Sunny Corner, perhaps ironically, because it's a pretty gloomy day. But behind us is part of the Australian mining industry. This was a boom town 120 odd years ago. European Australia has had a very, very rich relationship with mining, which we have today. This once housed thousands and thousands of people. Rich industry, and we're talking about precious metals here: silver, lead, zinc, etc. But this is what happens with mining. Now, we're only about 45 minutes west of the centre of the Blue Mountains. We're right on the edge of the Great Divide. We're up high, we're getting close to 1,200 metres here. And this combination of the geology with volcanics has created these rich mineral resources. But what upsets me is what we're looking at here. See, there's not a lot of vegetation. It's too toxic for plants to tolerate this, because mining shut down over 100 years ago, and these are the messages we really need to remember and learn from. And a place like Sunny Corner for me is really important legacy. How are we making sure that our future mine does not create an ecological disaster like this one? There's been very little rehabilitation. There's been a few efforts, but unfortunately this is the history we need to learn. When you mine a lot of these beautiful, rich seams, you can create a toxic reaction, chain reaction that continues to today. So there's a good reason why this is clear around us. It's not herbicide, it's toxic. Plants can't grow here. And the water coming out of here is even worse, as we'll see. Water is a really powerful solvent, and it can dissolve. It has amazing abilities to break down, dissolve, and mobilise pollution. And although this mine shut over 100 years ago, several mines are honeycombed in the hills around us. Because they've set off this process, the mine, the sulphur, the ore, the water combine, and they're mobilising this pollution which is coming out of these mine shafts, these mine diggings, 100 years later. I don't like this water at all. I know a bit about what's in it. I don't want any contact at all with this. So I'm going to get a sample and we're going to get some more lab testing done. Now that looks like water. I've actually seen water that looks far worse than that. Looks can be deceiving. Dissolved in this, it's very, very acidic, but it's absolutely loaded with toxic levels of metals. This gives us some clue. This is a reason why there's nothing growing around here. But water is really good at mobilising pollutants in here, and that's gone down and it enters the Turon River system, joins the Macquarie River, and it becomes part of the Murray-Darling. There's almost no life here. There's a really tough algae growing here. There's always something in nature that can exploit contaminated conditions. But overall, just downstream from here, would you drink this? It could be the last thing you ever did. But one of the big ones, one of the big things we see with a lot of these mines is the zinc. Zinc is dangerous at 10. It's coming out of that mine now at 240,000. What's your reaction to that?
It's horrifying and it's scary that people are swimming and catching fish in the water just downstream of this. And to think that zinc is toxic at even very low levels to aquatic life, it's just gobsmacking that it's been allowed to just come into our waterways like that. From a mine that's shut down and just been forgotten about, it's astounding.
So Clarence Colliery, you can see behind me, has been operating in the upper parts of the Blue Mountains for over 40 years now. They mine coal ore from longwall mining, so you can see a small part of that behind me in the landscape, but the majority of the workings are actually underneath us and throughout the landscape around us.
Now the land below us is state forest. It's largely natural, but below our feet, several hundred metres, are coal mines. This area is being mined. And the river that's flowing down through here is the Wollongambie River. Its waters pure and clean and full of a diversity of life. So these waters flowing down here, this is the lifeblood of one of the biggest rivers flowing through the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. The mine has been going for a bit over 40 years in this ancient landscape that's been eroded and developed over millions of years, and this has caused dramatic cataclysmic pollution of what you would think would be a really protected waterway.
And it may well be the only World Heritage Area that is the recipient of coal mine wastewater into the receiving waterway. Behind me you can see the large dam where the wastewater is discharged to out of Clarence Colliery, and then the spillway that enters the Wollongambie River. So when the mine workings get inundated by groundwater, they mobilise a lot of heavy metals due to the sulphur in the coal ore. Those heavy metals then become soluble within the water, and they're often discharged into the local waterway. Here at Clarence Colliery they do some treatment of the water and then discharge it into the waterway. So since 2013 I've been investigating the impacts of the wastewater on the Wollongambie River, and we've looked at water column pollutants, sediment pollutants, and even the bioaccumulation within animals that live in the river, and then also flora that grows alongside the river.
These waters around the Sydney and Blue Mountains area, this is some of the best water quality. Very, very low salt. We've just checked the oxygen, heaps of oxygen, cool, clear, fast flowing waters, and there's abundant animal life living here. So we're up the top of the watershed of the Wollongambie River, and it drains down here, and about a kilometre and a half or so, it flows from State Forest into the World Heritage Area. And from there, goes on a journey down through Wollomine National Park into the Colo River and part of the Hawkesbury Nepean. And this beautiful, clean, life-filled river, everything changes 100 metres down from here. So what I'm standing in here is mine drainage. There's a natural flow here, but most of this, probably 95%, is due to about 100 metres from here. The Clarence Colliery is discharging its waste. All that accumulated water that's mixed up with the coal, the sulphur, and the coal washery, the contaminants are flushed away. So this is essentially used as a waste disposal. It's a small tributary that flows into the Wollongambie River about 50 metres from where we're standing, and then the contamination plume from this, it's loaded with salts, minerals and metals. And the complex chemical changes here are essentially, it's like a cluster of contamination.
The insect communities are remaining impaired, and this is due to contaminants that are locked into the sediment from long time mining and discharge of wastewater, and that is still holding back the recovery of insects.
The fish and the tiny little insects that live in our rivers are being exposed to these toxic pollutants. Even at levels that are quite low, this can damage these fragile ecosystems and animals. When you look at the food chain, people are catching fish that come from these rivers which are in a polluted state. When you consume the contaminated tissue of these animals, it's making its way into your body.
Lay me down when the night falls, give our bones when the time calls. Oh my brother, my sister, we all go down to the river. To the river, down to the river.
We are 22 kilometres downstream of the Clarence coal mine that discharges its waste. And where it discharges it, it makes up about 90% of the flow. Even down here, we could see that a substantial proportion of this flow was impaired, with exactly the combination of pollutants coming out of that mine. So the plume, compared to all other mines I look at, the plume, that's the level of contamination that comes downstream. It was still harming aquatic life in the river here. So we did water quality sampling, we had samples tested, we looked at the invertebrate life at different sites coming down, And we shared these results with the community, the Blue Mountains community.
People in the society became aware through some work that Western Sydney University were doing that all was not right in the water. What we found out were that there were high levels of metals, that there was high levels of salinity, and that the licence wasn't tight enough, wasn't protecting it, and there was an opportunity through the EPA to actually have a say and to get involved.
The community got behind this and basically wrote to the EPA more than 100 letters demanding action to clean up the mine waste coming out of the Clarence Colliery.
And over 130 of our members wrote submissions to that, asking for the water quality to be improved.
And you know what? They did. And the EPA did. They tightened the licence. The EPA formally told Clarence, you've got to reduce the contamination level, which requires a higher level of treatment.
So this new licence, which recently came into play around about 12 months ago, has had cascading effects downstream in the World Heritage Area, where we've found that life is rebounding compared to that was there in 2013.
And we're actually watching life come back to this severely impaired river. So this gives us hope. Pollution has dropped. We're getting less concentration of the nasties, nickel and zinc in particular. But what proves that it's good is the ecosystem. It's bouncing back, it's flourishing. The animals don't lie. They either live or die, and they're living, they're breeding, they're doing well, and that life in the river is just perfect for the conservation value of this important area.
The insect communities are recovering, they're bouncing back. We've measured wide abundance and diversity within sites here. So the key into reducing pollution impacts and restoring the ecosystem is behind the regulation of the mine wastewater. The insect communities will have a chance to come back as there is less contaminants in the river.
It's bursting with life. We put our net in here, the animals are jumping out of the net. And it's not just a few, it's a diverse range, all different types of species and niches, but they're in big numbers. And they've improved, they've lifted enormously since the EPA got the mine to improve the treatment and the pollution has reduced.
So very pleased that some improvements now many years on from that are beginning to be seen in that river, and that's a great thing for the community to know.
What's great about the changes to the licence is it shows that in the future at other coal mines we can continually change the way we treat the water and improve the licensing system to improve the health of the receiving waterway and have a much better outcome for the environment that the protection licence is protecting.
It's fantastic to know that the water flowing in is now cleaner and getting better, and hopefully will remain for future generations.
It's not all over Red Rover, and it's not just a done complete that we're just going to pollute and pollute more and more. That if we direct our activities properly, we can actually be a part of the rescue of this country rather than being the parasite that we've sort of come to be.
And we really need to move forward and just look to the future and do what's best for future generations. That really is to restore what has been damaged and prevent it from happening in the future.
Starry night, she's watching, weary eyes reminded of all he's forgotten. New day on the horizon, midnight calls my sister. We all go down